The daisy was 11 centimeters tall when they found it. Sarah had measured it every morning for 31 days, not with instruments. Because instruments were rationed and tracked, but with the inside of her wrist, the soft skin there pressed flat against the soil, while her fingers counted off each centimeter against the knuckle lines she'd memorized as a child. She and Dov had agreed, without ever saying it aloud, that the day the plant cleared the pot's rim would be the day they stopped pretending it wasn't there. That morning she'd pressed her wrist down and felt the petals brush her palm, soft as an exhaled breath, and yellow, a yellow so particular and alive that she'd had to look away. They came at the third bell. That was how the Veth measured time aboard the occupation vessels. 3 percussion strikes on resonant hull metal, each bell dropping in pitch, the sound spreading through the underwarren like water soaking into clay. The Veth had colonized the lower decks of 12 human generation ships when the fleet fell from drive space 40 years ago, and in those 40 years the humans who survived had compressed themselves into the ship's understructure. The crawlways, the recycling corridors, the agricultural sub-level that no longer grew food. Because the Veth had confiscated the grow lamps and the nutrient baths on the first day, and had not returned them. 211 humans still alive called themselves the Underdwellers. The Veth called them Refuse. Sarah heard the maglock cycling and set down her wrist against the soil one last time. The daisy's name, if it could be said to have one, was Frick. Dov had named it. He'd said it as a joke, one of those small domestic jokes that couples make to fill silence, but the name had stuck, the way names do when they get attached to something you love. Frick, their daisy. Theirs in a way that nothing had been theirs in years. Not the bunk, not the water ration, not the air that moved through the vents on a schedule the Veth adjusted without notice. The air belonged to the Veth. The water belonged to the Veth. The light, what little of it reached the underwarren through corroded port seals, belonged to the Veth. Frick had been grown from a seed that Sarah had carried for 9 years inside a seam she'd sewn into the lining of her work jacket. She'd taken it from the body of her mother, who'd kept it the same way, who'd gotten it from her own mother in the hours after the Veth boarded. 3 generations of a seed travelling inside a coat. When Sarah finally planted it, she used drinking water, hers and Dov's both, for 3 days, and she'd cried while she watered it, not from grief but from something she didn't have a word for. The panel came open. 4 Veth biosuits filled the corridor. The Veth were not large exactly, but they occupied space differently than humans did. The biosuits they wore in human pressure zones had been engineered to project volume, to make the wearer seem to fill a doorway even when they didn't. Veth psychology, territory was posture. Power was the perception of mass. They had surveilled the underwarren for 31 days with atmospheric sensors designed to detect unauthorized biological growth. Any cellular respiration above a threshold of 2 milliliters of oxygen per hour. Frick had crossed that threshold sometime in the 2nd week. They'd been watching since then. Waiting, Sarah realized now, the way you wait when you want the crime to reach its full shape before you make the rest. The lead Veth's voice box rendered human speech in a flat corrected tone, no inflection, no variation. Occupant Sarah and Dov. Under Compact Article 9, unauthorized biological cultivation. It didn't phrase it as an accusation, phrased it as a label being applied to a category of thing you will accompany. Dov looked at Sarah. She looked at the daisy. She picked up the pot. The Veth's voice box cycled through what she recognized as a repetition protocol. The same statement twice, louder. But she was already walking, the pot held in both hands, and after a moment they let her pass because the arithmetic was simple. She was going where they were taking her. The compact tribunal convened in what had once been the fleet's secondary navigation bay, on the boundary level between the underwarren and the Veth occupation zone. The Veth called it the interface, a word that implied neutrality the room had never possessed. High ceilings. Cold, Veth bioluminescence in the upper registers, blue-green, designed for Veth visual comfort and calibrated to make human skin look grey, cadaverous. Sarah had been here twice before for ration audits. She'd always come out feeling like something had been decided about her while she wasn't paying attention. The arbiter was Monk. The humans called him that. His actual designation speech was a sequence of chemical markers that no human larynx could approximate. But early in the occupation, a child in the Underwarren had mispronounced it as Monk, and the name had spread because it sounded like something you'd call a creature that sat on a throne built from borrowed authority, which was precisely what Monk was. He'd been appointed arbiter by the Veth Occupation Command 7 years ago and had not been replaced. Not because he was just, because he was efficient. He closed cases, he reduced variables. He had, over 7 years, developed an exquisite sensitivity to anything in the Underwarren that couldn't be measured. He stood. Veth arbiters did not sit. Sitting was a form of vulnerability. At the center of the navigation bay, behind him on the display screens, was the live feed from Sarah and Dov's compartment. The Daisy, in the footage, like a yellow star in a grey universe. Monk's voice box said, "The organism requires water." Sarah said, "Yes. Water is a compact resource." "Yes, the organism is not a compact resource." He paused, which was unusual. Veth arbiters process without pause. "The organism is a deviation." There was a word in Veth administrative language. Sarah had learned it from the water ration clerks, that translated roughly as that which represents the shape of a problem that has not yet fully materialized. Veth were obsessive catalogers of potential. They didn't fear things that threatened them. They feared things that implied the existence of a threat not yet named. The Daisy was that kind of problem. It wasn't water usage, wasn't protocol violation. It was the fact that it existed at all. That two humans in a grey crawlway had decided, in defiance of every material condition of their existence, to grow a yellow flower. Monk said, "You will surrender the organism." Dov, standing at Sarah's shoulder, said something in a low voice, not loud enough for the voice box to capture, not intended for the Veth at all, just for Sarah, just her name spoken the way he said it when he was steadying himself on her. She felt it land in her chest. She said no. Navigation Bay did not go quiet because it had never been loud. But something changed in the quality of the silence. A pressure adjustment, a recalibration. The 4 biosuits from the corridor had followed them in and now arranged themselves at the room's corners with the geometric precision of Veth authority. "We are everywhere you might move to." Monk said, "This is not a negotiation protocol." "I know. Surrender has a definition within the compact, a pause. Your refusal is definitionally outside. I know what my refusal is." She set the pot down on the navigation bay's floor. Not as surrender. She set it down the way you put something valuable on a table when you want your hands-free. The Daisy's single bloom, it had only the one. 31 days of scarce water, and it had produced exactly one, caught the Veth bioluminescence and threw back a yellow that was almost aggressive, almost rude, in that cold blue-green room. Dov crouched beside the pot and pressed his thumb into the soil to check the moisture level, the same way he did every morning, as if this were their compartment and this were an ordinary day. He looked up at Sarah. She looked down at him. Monk said, "Understand the consequence classification." Sarah said, "Tell me." Resource confiscation, compartment reassignment, separation of cohabitants for a period not less than sense-fration, Dov said. He was still crouching. He wasn't looking at Monk. He was looking at the Daisy. "That's the one you think will work." The Veth conceptual framework for human psychology had been assembled. Over 40 years from behavioral data, they knew humans formed pair bonds. They knew separation caused what the Veth catalogued as measurable reduction in cooperative output. They used separation the way they used water rations and work assignments, as a precision tool for maintaining compliance. Monk was not bluffing. Separation was in the toolkit, and he would deploy it with the same bureaucratic equanimity he deployed everything. Sarah had spent 9 years with a seed sewn into a coat. She'd watched her mother die of a rationing error that wasn't an error. She'd watched Dov's hands shake in the dark during what the underdwellers called the cold months, when the Veth reduced heating to the under-warren to conduct what they logged as thermal optimization. She'd watched 211 people learn to eat less, sleep less, speak less, want less. She'd watched the daisy push through the soil like it had been told the universe was mostly made of room. She said, "My name is Sarah Varn. Mother was Idris Varn. Her mother was Kala Varn. The seed I planted came from a Jabera daisy that my grandmother grew in the forward arboretum before the Veth decommissioned it. The seed travelled in the seam of a jacket for 22 years before I planted it. To plant it became required 9.3 millilitres of water total across 31 days. You could fill a Veth standard ration cup from that water and have some left over." She paused. "I want you to write that in your administrative record. Sarah Varn, Frick, 31 days, a yellow Gabera daisy. Write it down. Monk processed. The request is outside. Write it down." The biosuits shifted. Sarah didn't move. The thing about the Veth that humans in the Under-Warren had spent 40 years learning was that Veth psychology was built on closure. Completed things. Unresolved variables produced what the Veth called resonance errors. Kind of low-level systemic anxiety that propagated through Veth decision-making until the open case was closed. Monk could not end this tribunal without a logged disposition. He needed a record. And Sarah had just handed him a record, one that named her, named the plant, named the seed's history, and in doing so had made the daisy not a deviation but a datum. You cannot confiscate a datum. You can suppress it, you can reclassify it, you can bury it in administrative subcategories. But a Veth arbiter, operating under Compact Article 9, had a legal obligation to record what was submitted to the record, and what Sarah had submitted was a lineage. 3 generations of women, a seed, and 22 years of a coat seam holding against the dark. Monk was quiet for 9 seconds, which was an eternity by Veth tribunal standards. He said, "The organism is logged as a historical artifact of human cultural continuity under Compact Appendix 14, subsection 3. Which exempts cultural artifacts from standard resource use protocols." He said it without inflection, without any marking that might indicate he understood what he was doing, which was the only way he could do it at all. The artifact is to be maintained in its current condition by the cohabitants of record. Dov looked up at Sarah. The daisy did not know what had happened. It was 11 centimeters tall, and it was yellow, and it was alive. And it faced the bioluminescence with the straightforward attention of a plant that had been bred, across uncountable generations, to turn toward light. Sarah put her hands under the pot and picked it up again. They walked out of the navigation bay. The biosuits did not follow. In the corridor, Dov took half the pot's weight and they carried it between them the way you carry something you will not put down. And when they reached the first junction where the Veth surveillance lines ended, a 12-meter stretch of corridor that the underdwellers called Gap for reasons everyone understood and no one explained. Dov stopped walking. He said that was insane. Sarah said yes. "You knew that would work?" She thought about it. She hadn't known. She'd known that Monk's system needed a resolution and that she could hand him one, and that a daisy named Frick, logged as a cultural artifact of human continuity, was harder to kill than a rule violation. She'd known that the Veth's obsession with classification could be turned like a tool in a lock you weren't supposed to be able to open. What she hadn't known, what she'd only suspected, the way you suspect something you can't yet prove, was that 211 people living in grey crawlways were going to need something to look at that was yellow. She said, "I knew what we had." Word got through the Under-Warren the way everything got through, slowly, in pieces, each piece slightly changed by the telling. By the evening bell it had reached the far compartments, the ones near the recycling cores where the heat made the air smell so like scorched metal, where the oldest of the underdwellers lived, and where the youngest had been born, who had never seen the upper decks, only knew the Veth as sound and shadow and the periodic reduction of rations. The story passed through them. Sarah Varn and the daisy, Frick, they tried to take it and she made them write it down. There was something in that the underdwellers felt, though they couldn't name it precisely. Something about the writing down, about insisting on being recorded, about making the system that wanted to erase you memorialize you instead. Dov set the pot on the shelf above their bunk where the light was best. Not Veth light, not the blue-green of the upper decks. Port seal glow, red-shifted, warm. In it, Frick's petals held a colour that Sarah had no adequate wood for. Not just yellow, but the yellow of something that had been grown toward the light through 31 days of grey. She said, "It'll need water tomorrow," Dov said. "Half mine." "Half mine," she said. In the navigation bay, Monk filed his administrative record. Artifact, cultural continuity, exemption granted. He filed it because the compact required it, and closed the case and moved to the next variable. He did not think about the daisy after that. The Veth did not think about things once they were filed. But the record existed now in the compact's administrative system. It said, Sarah Van, Frick Gerbera Daisy, yellow, 3 generations, seed in a coat for 22 years, 31 days, 11 centimeters. The Veth had put it there themselves. Over the following weeks, other things appeared in the underwarren that were harder to explain. Piece of red cloth hung in a compartment near the recycling core. When the ration clerk asked, occupant said it was a cultural artifact and cited Compact Appendix 14, subsection 3. A stone that Dov's bunkmate Pell had painted in 3 colours, none of them grey. A sound, humming, rhythmic, melody so old none of the underdwellers knew where it had come from, that began in one corridor and spread, soft and resistant, through the walls. The Veth filed each report, logged each artifact, exempted each one under the provision they had written themselves. Their administrative system grew heavy with it, these small human insistences, each one separately manageable, each one filed and closed, each one a door they had locked from the inside while leaving the key on the wrong side. Monk raised the issue twice in Occupation Command Review. He said the proliferation of cultural artifact claims represented a resonance pattern that merited escalation. Occupation Command reviewed his analysis, reviewed the compact, reviewed the existing exemptions they could not legally revoke without renegotiating, provisions they had written themselves, and classified the pattern as low-intensity administrative friction. They were not wrong. Individually, each artifact was nothing. A daisy, a cloth, a painted stone, a hum in the walls. The Veth were very good at seeing the parts of things. They were, Sarah came to understand, not particularly good at seeing what the parts of things were parts of. 47 days after the tribunal, she was working her assigned shift in the water recycling substation, pulling filter membranes, cleaning them by hand, the same task she'd been assigned for 6 years. When Pell appeared at the substation hatch and crouched down to be level with her and said, very quietly, that someone on the upper decks had opened a channel. Not a Veth-monitored channel, a human one, running through frequencies that Veth had never bothered to surveil because they'd been declared dead signal years ago. Someone from another ship. Sarah put down the filter membrane. How many ships, she said. Pell said he didn't know. He said the voice on the channel had been speaking for 11 minutes before anyone in the underwarren with a working receiver had caught it, and that the voice had said the same thing 11 times. We are the Kell survivors. We are the underdwellers of the perihelion fleet. We are still here. Respond if you receive. Sarah cleaned her hands on her jacket and thought about a seed sewn into a seam, travelling in the dark for 22 years waiting. Get Dov, she said. She built the transmitter out of 3 filter membranes, a recycling pump's signal coil, and the receiver components from 2 Veth atmospheric sensors she removed from the underwarren's corridor ceiling during a period when she knew the surveillance logs were being overwritten by a standard maintenance purge. It took 11 days. Dov soldered the connections with a filament he extracted from a bunk heating element. Working by the light of Frick's pot, Daisy, now 15 centimeters tall and bearing a second bloom, a second yellow star in the grey. The transmission she sent was 40 seconds long. She said, This is Sarah Varn, Underdwellers, Generation Ships Velda and Agathon, 211 surviving. We have been here 40 years. We are still here. We are responding. Then, she said. Grew a flower. They wrote it down. It's in their system. Find Compact Appendix 14 subsection 3. There's a door in it, and the key is on our side. She gave the frequency, gave the coordinates embedded in the ship's position data that she'd memorized from a ration clerk's form 3 years prior, closed the transmission. Then she and Dov sat in the recycling substation and did not speak for a while. He said, eventually, think they'll find it, she said. The appendix, the door. She looked at him. He was 41 years old and there was grey in his hair that hadn't been there 2 years ago. And his hands were scarred from 6 years of filter membranes. And he was looking at her the way he'd looked at her from the floor of the navigation. Bay crouched beside a daisy, steadying himself. She said, the door was always there. That's the thing about doors. She leaned back against the substation wall. Monk put it there himself. The response came 19 days later on the same dead signal frequency, and it was not from the Kel survivors. It was from a human signals analyst aboard a vessel called the Cassava, fleet designation unknown, and it said, we have the compact. We have legal representation in the Veth administrative courts. We have Appendix 14. We are coming. Estimated arrival 63 days. Maintain the record. Do not let them close the case. Sarah read the message 4 times. On the 4th time she started laughing. Was a sound she hadn't made in so long it startled Dov awake from the bunk, and when he looked at her she just handed him the receiver and watched his face while he read it. He said, 63 days. She said, I know. Going to need more water. She said, half yours. Half yours, he said. She picked up the pot. Frick had 22 centimeters now. 2 blooms, a 3rd bud forming at the node below the 2nd leaf. In the red-shifted glow of the port seal it was the colour of something that had been kept alive by people who refused to let it be otherwise. She pressed her wrist against the soil, 22 centimetres. She moved her thumb to the space above the pot's rim and measured the distance to the bud. She had 63 days. She thought, we've had 40 years. She put the pot back on the shelf above the bunk where the light was best and went to work.